Hello, fictional. Welcome to the What If Issei. Today we are gonna see, what if Issei was the hidden dragon leader? Part 5. If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. Issei Hyoudu's day was beginning like many others had during the last week and a half, but with a small difference. Damn Zenovia, that's good, Issei grunted as his morning wood was teased by the naked brunette. Typically, it was his childhood friend Irina who had taken to enjoying his morning wood, and Zenovia was reserved to getting her Issei time via clone, who would visit her every night since their return to Kuoh. But today Irina wasn't in the mood, and Issei understood why, so Zenovia decided to wake him up herself. Irina's reason was that today was Parents' Day at their school, and it reminded Irina of the fact that her father hid a vital secret from her that changed her life once it was revealed. While she was glad that she could spend all her time with Issei thanks to learning about God's death, she was still torn about everything, and Issei knew it. Zenovia was caught up in similar feelings to those of her friend. While Issei's visits helped, it didn't cure her discomfort at the new situation. She was adopted by the church and raised by one of the nuns that even gave her the last name she currently uses. Zenovia never got to say goodbye to her adopted mother, and admittedly had she had the chance she'd probably ask the same question that Irina wanted to: why wouldn't you tell me? Taking a break from the morning routine, Zenovia looked at Issei and said, "You should go see Irina after this. She needs you right now." "I know, Zenovia, and I will," Issei replied calmly. But Zenovia replied before finishing up Issei so the day could get started. Zenovia and Irina were practically sisters due to the time they spent together, and she knew that Irina needed Issei as much as she did, perhaps even more. The now dressed Issei quickly made his way next door where Irina was waiting and without too much trouble opened the door. Issei then sprinted up the stairs to Irina's room, fully expecting his childhood friend to be up. "Irina, are you awake? We have to go to school," Issei said from outside of the bed. "Go away, Issei. I don't want to go to school today," Irina replied, clearly upset. "Not happening," Issei replied. Shoving the door open, Issei wasn't surprised by the sight that greeted him. Irina was still dressed in her pajamas, but the scrunchie that adorned her hair most of the time were sitting in front of her as though to taunt her. He could tell Irina was crying a fair bit, and he honestly couldn't blame her. "I'm surprised you're not enjoying some shower fun with Zenovia. I know how much you like shower sex." Irina pouted, aware that Issei was seeing her at her most miserable, something she hated. "Yes, I do, and you make such cute noises when I wash your breasts, but Zenovia was worried about you and asked me to come over." Issei smiled, staying off the bed since Irina would use every weapon she could to distract him from the talk. Irina blushed at the response. "Zenovia needs to mind her own business." Irina pouted. "Yes, and you need to get dressed. We can talk about how much of a failure your father is after school." Issei smiled, knowing that their talk would consist of Irina venting her frustration before Issei fucked the rest of it away. Irina looked at him with her big eyes filled with hope. "Promise." "Yes, I do, now get dressed, dummy. I'm sure Zenovia is tired of waiting for you." "Oh, and you're wearing the scrunchie," Issei insisted. Irina pouted. "Just do it for me, Irina. Those scrunchie look so cute on you," Issei pleaded. Irina pouted because she couldn't resist when Issei said that. "Fine, but only for you." Irina relented and she got up and prepared for the day, while Issei waited downstairs. As he sat in homeroom, Issei couldn't help but wonder what was going through Irina's head. Seeing the various parents come to support their kids must have hurt something fierce, since she felt her father betrayed her by hiding God's death. His musing was broken as the door opened again. Even though homeroom had begun, "It can't be," Zenovia gasped as two new people appeared in the classroom, people Zenovia and Irina were very familiar with. The first was a woman with blue eyes that looked like she was in her 30s, but the nun habit she wore hid everything else. The second figure was a male dressed in priest robes, and it was Irina's father, Dark Issei Hyoudou. "Appa," Irina muttered in disbelief. "This is about to get ugly," Issei thought to himself as Tauji and the other woman sat next to Issei's parents. Issei had no idea how Tauji even knew about this day, but he was here. The glare that Irina sent his way could only be countered with a look of innocence, since he had no idea this was coming. The first few classes went off without a hitch, though Issei couldn't help but wonder what was going through Irina's head. It was during English class that things finally hit the breaking point. "Okay, class, we're going to use the clay in front of you to show something that is important to us. You can do anything you want," the teacher announced. Issei couldn't help but look towards Irina, and he could see the pained look on her face. "She's in trouble," Issei thought to himself. Everything that was once important to her was related to the church, and that brought her pain. There was no way Irina could finish this assignment. "Hey professor, Irina isn't feeling well. Mind if I take her to the infirmary?" Issei said calmly as Irina looked over to her with relief in her eyes. "Alright, Mr. Hyoudou, go ahead," the teacher replied, and Issei walked over to Irina and grabbed her by the hand. "Issei," Irina said timidly, trying to hold back her tears. "I know," Issei replied, and he grabbed her hand and walked out. As he did he could see Irina's father wanting to follow, but Issei mouthed I'll handle it since he could take care of Irina best on his own. He knew Irina wasn't ready to deal with her father quite yet. The pair made their way to the infirmary and Irina sat down on the bed trying to gather herself despite the clear discomfort. Issei, I'm sorry that I'm such a basket case. Irina said bashfully. Issei simply smiled before sitting down next to her. You're not a basket case, Irina. You just still haven't quite recovered from what happened. Issei replied before spreading his legs and motioning for Irina to sit in between her. When she did, Issei responded by wrapping his arms around her waist to comfort her. Irina smiled and leaned back against Issei enjoying his warmth. Yeah, I know you've done plenty to help me forget, but every time I look in the mirror and look at the scrunchie, I think about Dad's betrayal. Irina frowned as she reached for her scrunchie once again just to be stopped by Issei. I know, Irina, and I know how much it hurts. Issei replied before pecking her on the cheek. But remember this, your father is the one who told us about the supernatural. Your father is the one who made it so when you did come to Kuoh, I would be ready to help you with whatever brought you there. Issei reminded her, kissing her on the cheek after each statement. Yes, but Irina started to say before Issei put his finger on her lips. Irina, do you honestly think your father hid the truth about God from you on purpose? Riaz was unaware of the truth and her sibling was a Mayu who happens to be a Siskin of the highest variety. Clearly this was something nobody was supposed to know about. Issei said calmly, using the fact that Riaz was as unaware as them to help calm Irina down. As hurt as Irina was, she had to admit Issei was right. She wasn't the only one caught off guard, but she was taking it personally. Thanks, Issei. I needed that. Irina smiled. I know, and that's why we're friends. For the record, your dad wanted to follow, but I said I'd handle it. I'm sure the old man knows how hurt you were by everything, Issei revealed, causing Irina's eyes to widen. Thank Issei. Now let's go back to class, Irina said happily as she got up from Issei's warm embrace. She would talk to her father at some point, but for now she had a job to do as a student of Kuoh Academy. Alright, Issei replied, and the pair made their way back to the classroom. When the day came to an end, Issei hoped that things would calm down as they prepared to go to the orc. Sadly, that wasn't the case. Mitsuda and Motohama ran towards Issei's classroom with smiles on their face. Hey Issei, you're not going to believe this, but there's a magical girl over by the gym. Motohama said happily before running out. Magical girl, what is he talking about? Irina wondered in confusion, but another member of their party wasn't so unaware. Issei, we need to go to the gym now. Yumi said hastily. Alright, Issei smiled before turning towards his parents. Irina can show you guys around. I've got something to do. Issei said calmly before leaving a helpless Irina with his mom and dad, along with her father and Zenovia's guest. That jerk, Irina frowned. Something we should know about, Issei's mom said with a wry smile. No idea, but Issei is going to pay for this later. Irina said angrily as she was forced to lead the group around. Gymnasium. Issei and Yumi made their way over to the gymnasium where Mitsuda and Motohama had ran, and Issei couldn't help but wonder what was going on. As they arrived at the gym, Issei couldn't help but facepalm at the sight that awaited him. Most of the school's photography club including Mitsuda and Motohama were there, and the person who they were taking pictures of immediately caught Issei's eyes. She was medium build with black hair tied in twintails and blue eyes. She was wearing a pink magical girl outfit, but Issei wasn't focused on that. No, he was focused on something else. How the hell can somebody that powerful be dressed so strangely? Issei mentally groaned. He could tell that the young woman in front of him was stupidly strong, so much so that it was terrifying. I should have known it was her. Yumi groaned, causing Issei to twitch even more. So you know this chick? Issei asked, almost afraid of the answer. Yes, I do. That chick is Sona's older sister, the Mayu Serafal Leviathan. Yumi nodded. Issei couldn't believe that this person was a Mayu, but he knew the fun was about to end with Saji's arrival. Get out of here, everyone. Saji of the student council said with a shrill voice. Get out of here, Saji. Yeah, get lost, traitor, Mitsuda and Motohama growled, causing Saji's eyes to widen. Most people weren't aware of this, but Saji was a former pervert, and considering that he was a member of the council, he wanted that to stay a secret. Saji is right. You got your photos to enjoy, so go back to class. Issei said with a calm voice, interrupting proceedings. Mitsuda and Motohama hadn't seen their friend in a while, but the calm voice was enough to stop them. Got it, bud. I'll show you the pictures later. Mitsuda smiled as Motohama escorted everyone away. They knew that Issei's calm would only last so long. Thanks for that, Hyoudou. Saji said bashfully before turning towards the young woman. I don't know who you're with, miss, but wearing a magical girl's suit to a place like this is highly inappropriate. This is my business outfit. Serafal smiled back, causing Issei and Yumi to face palm. The craziness only grew when Sona arrived in the gymnasium. Saji, I heard all this commotion, and Sona started to say before Serafal shot at her like a missile. Sona. Serafal said happily. Issei couldn't help but sweat drop as he watched Serafo behave around her more straight-laced sister, and Irina wonders why I wanted to stay away from devil politics. Issei chuckled to himself. If the young woman in front of him was a Mayu, the devil world definitely had issues. After his meeting with Serafo, Issei had no interest in meeting the other devils and went home since he couldn't exactly go to the kendo club without causing some headaches of a different variety. For a few hours he simply played games waiting for somebody to return, and around 5 p.m. he finally sensed people come into the house. Interestingly enough, it was only his family along with Taoji and his guest that arrived. It didn't take long for Taoji Shido to arrive at his door and knock. "We need to talk, Issei, and don't bother pretending you don't know it's me." Taoji yelled. "Yeah, I know it's you, old man, come on in." Issei deadpanned as Taoji walked in. He didn't particularly care for the conversation that was coming, but it also had to be done. The fact he had just finished a game did help his mood. As stared at the man who taught him about the supernatural, Issei couldn't sense any malice from the old man, and his next words certainly made for a nice starter. "How much you know about the current situation, Issei?" Issei was aware that this wasn't the time for games and replied seriously, "I know that the three factions are about to have a major meeting in the next few weeks, and given how many high-ranking members showed up at Kuoh, I can only assume that you guys are planning to have the meeting at our lovely academy." Issei smiled. "Yes, but there's a reason we're having the meeting at Kuoh," Taoji replied sternly. "Because you wanted a location and situation where you could control what any possibly enemy does, right?" Taoji's eyes widened at this response. "What makes you say that?" Taoji glared angrily. "Because based on the few conversations I've had with Azazel, Kakabiel isn't the type to take orders from anybody unless they benefit him. It's one of the reasons this latest event was really an issue, because somebody convinced Kakabiel to work with Valper. The question then becomes why." Taoji looked at Issei like he had a second head since his reasoning was spot on. "You're terrifying, kid, because that's exactly right. Azazel ain't the only one who believes this shadow organization exists, and in truth, we've been looking for proof of them for years. This latest snafu was perhaps the greatest proof of their existence, and our goal now is to lure them out," Taoji replied. Issei frowned heavily since there was a piece missing from this. "There's just one problem, old man, and you know it." Issei glared. "And what's that?" Taoji said coldly. "No matter how bold a group may be, you're going to have a bunch of incredibly strong people in one area at once. This shadow group isn't going to attack unless you have pretty damn good bait ready." Issei frowned. "You're too smart for your own good, kid." Taoji smiled. "Tell me something I don't know," Issei retorted. "Anyway, I just wanted to tell you what you've missed, but clearly you didn't miss a thing. I'm trusting you to watch over my daughter." Taoji smiled bitterly. "I know that already, old man. I'll watch over Irina as though my life depended on it." Issei replied. "Good. Things are about to get crazy, kid, and that orc is going to be ground zero." "I'm aware." Issei deadpanned. "Good. I'll see you around, kid," Taoji said cheekily. "Of course," Issei replied, and Taoji Shido left the room. A part of him wanted to ask about what happened when he finally spoke to Irina, but that was her business, and Issei wouldn't interfere unless he deemed it necessary. "Issei, I'm coming." Murayama moaned happily as Issei pounded her pee from behind. Because of Parents' Day, Issei couldn't enjoy his usual routine with the kendo club, and Issei was well aware that the girls were put out by it. In fact, the moment he arrived in the locker room the next day, he was quickly surrounded by Murayama and Caddis, along with a few other girls who were all naked and from the look of things soaking wet. Murayama went first, while Caddis and a few other girls were waiting with anticipation for their turn with Issei. Much to his enjoyment, there was a good chance no kendo would be taking place due to the eagerness of the girls. Unfortunately, as Issei pulled out of Murayama, the door to the locker room opened and Yumi Kiba walked in. "You've come at a rather horrible time, Yumi." Issei frowned, well aware that Caddis was looking at his member like it was the greatest candy in the world. "Yes, I know, and I'm sorry because I have to steal you from the girls. Riaz needs you for something and it can't wait." Yumi frowned. She knew that the girls needed this, and she normally wouldn't do it, but Riaz requested she grab him as soon as possible. Riaz can need him all she wants, but Issei is our manager, and right now he has to manage. Caddis pouted as she began sucking his length. "Right," another girl said firmly before going onto Issei's left side. A smiling Issei wrapped his arms around her naked waist and began making out with her, while Caddis worked on his member. Yumi blushed heavily since she knew that the girls were put out, and she couldn't blame them. Realizing there was no other choice, Yumi reached into her skirt pocket and pulled out her phone before dialing a specific number. "I hate to do this, girls, but I have no choice." Yumi frowned as she turned the phone towards Issei and showed him what number she was about to call. "You wouldn't." Issei glared in annoyance when he noticed the number. "What's going on?" Caddis said, nervously noticing the annoying in Issei's voice. "The number she has on her phone is that of our student council president." Issei frowned. "Yes, and with one call, I could tell her about what's going on in this club." You guys would be fine, but Issei would surely be expelled. Yumi bluffed. That's bold, Yumi. That's bold. Issei thought to himself. Sona was well aware of their activities, Issei knew that much, but she allowed it to happen due to his connection to Ria's. It would take one word from Yumi, and Sona's lenience would end, and he would be in trouble. Yumi would be put out a fair bit also, but she was clearly willing to sacrifice that. You bitch, Cadis growled, and the other girls were equally furious. They weren't aware of the activity, but considering the danger they had to play dead. All I need is for you to give me Issei for 30 minutes. After the orc is done with him he can come back and you girls can do whatever you want. Yumi said firmly. Issei knew it was a bluff, but he had to call it, since Sona could make it nearly impossible for him to get into any school that had women if she revealed all she knew. Very well, Issei frowned. But Cadis said in disbelief since they were being denied again. Don't worry, girls. Tomorrow is Saturday and we can have a massive orgy in the clubroom. Issei said with a smile on his face. Fine. Cadis bowed, pulling off of Issei along with the girl draped on his arm. I'm sorry, girls. Yumi said, solemnly aware that she was sort of helpless in this regards. Let's get going. Cadis frowned as she and the other girl moved away from Issei so he could get dressed. The very annoyed Issei arrived at the orc, wondering what in the world Riaz could be asking about now. Opening the door he found Riaz sitting down calmly with Valerie and Kaneko sitting on the couch together as always, and Irina and Zenobia sitting on the other couch with Asia. Carloman was leaning against the wall while Akeno was next to Riaz with a smile on her face. So what's so important that it couldn't wait until tomorrow, Riaz? I was in the middle of an orgy with my girls. Issei said bluntly, causing Asia to blush. Yesterday, my brother informed me that it was time to release my second bishop. Due to his unique power I needed some help training him and… Riaz started to say. No, Issei said, firmly aware of what Riaz was going to say. But Issei, but nothing, Riaz. There's absolutely no reason for me to train this kid, and if you need a powerful person to help you, Valerie can do the job, Issei said firmly. Riaz had to be insane for thinking this was a major issue. Despite all my time with Azazel, I'm terrible at training others. You're much better suited for it. Valerie said with a smile. The answer is still a firm no. He is your servant and not mine. Why in the world should I help you? Issei growled. Riaz frowned since Issei wasn't giving in to the idea, but she had an alternative means. How about I hire you to help him? Riaz said with a smile. His relationship with Yumi always came in handy at times like this. Issei twitched heavily at the thought before he got a vicious smile on his face. Alright, Riaz. I'll do it, Issei said with a grin on his face that promised much pain for the Grimoire heiress. Really, Riaz said happily. Yes, but under one condition, Issei replied with a half smile forming on his face. Name it, Riaz replied eagerly. You shouldn't have done that, Red. Valerie smiled, noticing Issei's expression. Oh yeah, Irina agreed, noticing the same thing. It's fine, Riaz said, calmly unaware of the danger she was in. Well, Riaz, instead of Yumi taking care of the payment you will. Issei smiled, causing Riaz's eyes to widen even more. Really, Issei, you're serious, Riaz said in almost shock. She'd been trying to get the young man to sleep with her for a while now, and he had thus far refused. She would gladly give herself to him if it meant getting her servant the training he needed. That's right. I'll train the servant, but I get to fuck you in exchange. Issei smiled. Issei was well aware of Riaz's desire for him, and he had refused thus far. However, she interrupted an orgy for this farce, and she needed to pay the price. Then let's go, Riaz said, happily jumping up from her desk and grabbing Issei and running towards her private room. As he was pulled by Riaz, the smile on his face turned to a vicious grin, one that was noticed by Valerie. Poor girl, she has no idea what's coming. Valerie chuckled. The smiling Irina turned towards Asia with a smile of her own. Hey Asia, you're going to need your sacred gear pretty soon. Irina revealed, causing Asia to blush even more at the implications. Okay, Asia stammered since she had been the one to heal Yumi on a few occasions after Issei had his way with her, so she expected as much. 5 minutes passed with nary a peep from the room, and when Issei walked back with a smile on his face, the girls looked nervous. Clone or real, Issei? Irina asked calmly. Real one. Well, my clone takes good care of Riaz. I'm going back to the kendo club. Yumi did promise I'd only be gone for 30 minutes, and Riaz's payment is going to take a bit longer than that, Issei said happily as he walked towards the door. I'm guessing we can't hear anything because of silencing seals? Valerie questioned. Issei paused briefly to answer the question, knowing how much fun he'd have with their responses. Yep. I told Riaz that I would train Gasper as long as she satisfied my clone. Issei explained, much to the collective horror of the 4 girls in the room who had slept with Issei and were fully aware of his incredible stamina. Yufufufu, so how bad is it going to be for poor Riaz? Akeno chuckled. She may not have slept with him, but the look of horror on the other girls promised something delightful. By this time Issei had arrived at the door and opened it before saying, my clone is going to take Riaz's virginity, but it's not the one Riaz wants. If Issei had stayed behind, he would have noticed that Irina's Inovia Carloman and Yumi's faces were frozen in fear, aware of what Issei had implied. Their faces remained frozen even when the Mao Lucifer arrived 10 minutes later, forcing Akeno to tell them that Rias was in the middle of a contract and she'd be finished soon. Issei's clone and Rias returned from the room around an hour later, and while Issei was immaculate, Rias was walking with a clear limp on her body. It made sense considering Issei sent 6 powerful loads into her ass, along with spanking it so many times her rear was almost as red as her hair when they finally stopped 10 minutes ago. The last 10 were spent in the nearby shower, so she was presentable to her peerage. "Asia, do you mind giving me a hand? I'm still a little sore," Rias said bashfully. She was so sore that her brother sitting on the couch barely registered in her mind. "You do realize that the Mao Lucifer is sitting in the middle of the clubroom?" Issei chuckled, causing Ria's eyes to widen. "Big brother, I'm so sorry for keeping you waiting," Rias said bashfully. "Oh, you're fine, Rias. How you handle your contracts is up to you," Surzicha said nonchalantly, causing Rias to blush crimson. "Just take us to him," Rias pouted, aware of what a mess this whole thing was. She was never more grateful that she chose to shower for the last 10 minutes, because her brother seeing how red her ass was would have been a big problem. "Alright," Surzicha smiled. Siskin he was, but considering how silent everyone was, he figured that he was better off not knowing. The group stood in front of a locked door with seals underneath it. Issei couldn't help but wonder how Rias made the person her servant if she's too weak to control her, but he didn't say as much with Mao Lucifer right there. He was bold but not stupid enough to test his luck. Hell, the only reason he stopped was so Rias could be presentable to the man when they returned, so this is where your second bishop stays, huh? The clone smirked. The now healed Rias replied with a calm voice, "That's right. So what makes this bishop so special?" Issei's clone wondered. "Asper is a vampire, but unlike most vampires he can walk in the sunlight. His sacred gear is extraordinarily powerful," Rias explained. "We can save the explanations for later. It's time to release him," Surzicha said calmly before casting a magic circle. Issei watched as the circle revealed a small seal which was quickly broken. "Let the fun begin," Issei thought to himself as Rias opened the door and walked in with the rest of the peerage not far behind. The room was practically barren aside from a small computer and some books, but in the middle was a large coffin. Rias walked up to the coffin and said softly, "Gasper, it's me, Rias. It's time to come out," Rias said softly. It was like she was dealing with a little kid. "No," a voice screamed out, causing Issei to face fault. "Gasper, come on," Rias said softly once again. "I don't want to come out. This world is scary," Gasper replied, causing Issei to twitch even more. "That's enough," Kaneko groaned and tossed the coffin aside. When the group came close and saw Gasper, the group was completely stupefied, particularly Issei. Gasper was a short young man with platinum blonde hair and a bob cut and red eyes, but you wouldn't have known he was a guy because he was dressed in the girl's uniform. Yumi dressing as a boy was one thing, and that bothered him quite a bit before he reminded her what being a girl was like. However, this kid was a whole different mess. "I'll see you later, Rias," the Issei clone said with a hint of annoyance before dispelling, since he really didn't want to reveal what happened to the original. Irina smiled bitterly, aware that it would come to her to solve the problem. "Don't worry about him. I'll tell Issei what he missed later," Irina said calmly. "Okay," Rias continued as she focused on the young man in question. Issei sat in his room after the long day, hoping to get some rest after the kendo club's enthusiastic practice. Unfortunately, he had to stay awake for a little bit longer since he didn't find out about the kid Rias wanted him to talk about. His clone was supposed to tell him when he came home, but it was obvious that it dispelled. Fortunately for him, Irina walked in with a bit of a smile on her face. "You really should have stuck around," Irina said with a wry smile, still dressed in her Kuoh outfit. "What did I miss?" Issei deadpanned. For the clone to dispel couldn't have been good. "Oh, nothing. Just that Rias had a bishop that can stop time," Irina said nonchalantly. She was going to enjoy Issei's face when he found out this little detail. "What?" Issei replied in disbelief. "You heard me, Issei. Her new bishop Gasper can stop time. Kid looks pathetic, but his power is very real," Irina explained. "Well, fuck," Issei groaned in annoyance, which was not the reaction Irina was hoping for. "Something wrong?" Irina said nervously. "Let's just say that things got more complicated," Issei replied, wondering how much he should tell his childhood friend. After all, Gasper's ability to stop time was the type of bait that the Shadow organization could use to change the game. Irina frowned heavily as she looked at Issei's expression, because it was one she was beginning to see a lot more. "Issei, what are you hiding?" Irina frowned, aware that Issei once again seemed to know something nobody else did. Issei wanted to tell Irina, but he also knew that Irina would not like what she had to say. "Trust me, Irina, you're better off not knowing," Issei replied. Irina frowned again, but Issei wasn't budging. "Fine, but this isn't over." Irina frowned as she left the room and her childhood friend to do as he pleased. "It never is," Issei whispered as he sat alone. He was doing Arena a favor since she would never realize that their group was live bait for a war that started long before any of them were born. So what are you going to do, partner? You can train the kid all you want, but considering the circumstances, Drake wondered. Yeah, it wouldn't do him much good. Sadly, I have a contract with Ria's, and I am nothing if not a dragon of my word. Issei frowned. This was not Ria's plan, she was too stupid for that, but the idea that her brother would use her for such a means was terrifying. As Issei relaxed in his room, he knew that the fun was just getting started. If Issei was going to train Gasper, he had to make sure of one thing before he got started with the young vampire. In order to do that, he made his way towards the fallen angel Azazel's house early Saturday morning. Here we go, Drake, Issei groaned in annoyance. The reason for his annoyance was because he knew he would be dealing with LeFay today, since his visit was unannounced. It was only a matter of time until Valerie's team had to take center stage, and that meant ensuring that they didn't fight each other on site anyway, so it was a necessary step. Are you sure about this? Drake asked for various reasons. No, but we have no choice. If what everyone is suggesting is correct, I need to get over my LeFay issue sooner or later since we'll be teaming up. Issei replied as he approached Azazel's house. After knocking on the door, Issei fully expected Valerie or Biku to answer the door, but as the door opened, Issei received a pleasant surprise. Hello there, LeFay Pendragon of all people answered, but instead of her usual outfit, she was wearing a kendo uniform, not unlike the one the girls in the kendo club wore. Whoa, Issei stammered, not expecting that. Just come on in, LeFay pouted, clearly aware of something. As the pair walked, Issei was pleasantly surprised that he wasn't trying to strangle the girl, which is what usually happened, and when they arrived in Azazel's study, they were met by smiling gazes of Valerie's team and Azazel. Valerie herself wasn't there for the moment, but Issei knew that she wasn't far behind. Clearly they had anticipated his action and were waiting for him. You owe me $20, Arthur, Biku chuckled. The other Pendragon nodded as Issei and LeFay walked back to the team. Somebody want to explain what's going on? Issei frowned before he felt a very familiar weight on his back. It was Valerie Lucifer herself pressing her body against him and wrapping her arms around his neck, placing her head right on Issei's left shoulder. When Gasper's time-stop powers were revealed, I knew you'd come talk to Azazel about it, but the usual elephant in the room was in play, Valerie explained, nodding towards a pouting LeFay. Issei and Biku suggested that she dress up in a kendo uniform to see if that would prevent my curse from activating. Arthur naturally doubted it, and they made a bet. Issei smiled. That's right, and Biku won since we didn't have to break you two up, Valerie chuckled as she got off of Issei and took her place on one of Azazel's couches next to Kuroka, who promptly laid on her thighs. Yes, it did. Now can I change out of this? It feels weird. LeFay pouted. Clearly she wasn't used to the outfit and it showed in her squirming around. Just deal with it for a little bit, kid. We're having a talk involving all of us, and you and Issei need to stay civil, Biku scoffed as the group focused on a smiling Azazel. So Issei, what do you want to talk to me about? Azazel smiled nonchalantly as though he didn't know the reason. Were you aware that Ria's had a bishop that could stop time before you guys planned this three factions meeting? Issei said coldly. Azazel frowned briefly before replying, I did not, but I confess that does explain plenty. Azazel's words spurred the other dragon in the room into speaking up. What's Issei talking about, Zaz? Valerie said coldly towards the fallen angel cadre. Azazel had the nerve to look slightly bashful as he continued, when word of Kakabiel revealing God's death reached me, I got a hold of Michael and Serziches immediately, and we tried to figure out what to do about the inevitable fallout. How long have you been able to get a hold of them? Vali said in disbelief. They've been in a cold war for a long time, and the idea of them talking was absurd. I've been able to talk to Serziches ever since I took you in, Valerie. We rarely talk, though I do confess that I told him the truth about Kuroka after you took her in. It the reason people stopped hunting her, or didn't you realize that? Azazel revealed. Vali was stunned by the response, but it was annoyingly like Azazel to be that way. Anyway, you guys got a hold of each other. What happened next? Valerie quickly questioned. We discussed the best way to handle the fallout, and Serziches suggested we announce a peace meeting and have it at Kuoh. Michael and I were shocked, but under the circumstances neither of us could exactly say no. Admittedly, I was going to send you or LeFay to Kuoh anyway, so it just gave me an excuse to move up the timeline. Azazel shrugged. How long ago was this? Valerie questioned. Everything happened the day after you guys stopped Kakabiel. By the time those two church girls were on a plane back, everything had pretty much been arranged, Azazel revealed. I see. Valerie frowned and Issei was annoyed as well. Serziches knew about Gasper's power and was basically setting his sister up as live bait for the Cows Brigade. And now I'm the one who has to train Gasper, Issei groaned. Look on the bright side. We know they're coming and we can plan a counterattack, Valerie smiled, having figured out the same thing. Fine, but I still don't like it. Issei replied. You don't have to like it, Issei. You just have to trust us to do our part. Azazel smiled. Yeah. Well, I gotta get going and deal with the little vampire. Issei frowned. This was not going to be a good day and he knew it. Issei's our mood only worsened when he arrived on the side of the old school building with Irina and Zenobia to meet with Gasper. He was wearing a black tracksuit with grey stripes and a red shirt underneath ready to train, but his sparring partner clearly wasn't. So you're Gasper? Issei said coldly. This was going to be annoying, and Issei knew it. He couldn't believe that the person who everyone was counting on was such a girly-looking loser. Yes. It's nice to meet you. Gasper said timidly. Gasper was wearing a white shirt with bloomers of all things which drove Issei up a wall. Anybody who saw him would have thought he was a girl, but thanks to his scent Issei knew better. Likewise. Issei said calmly. I'll leave you two alone to talk. Ria said bashfully. The rest of her peerage along with Zenobia and Irina followed suit, leaving Issei and Gasper alone for a little bit. Once everyone else was gone, Issei turned towards the young vampire and frowned. So you can stop time, huh? Issei scowled. Scary. Gasper yelped, much to Issei's annoyance. Enough, Issei spat in disgusting before firing an attack at the young vampire. Fortunately for Gasper, it was lightly powered, so the resulting blast didn't do any damage, but it did bring the other members of the orc back outside. What the heck was that? Riaz exclaimed. Dodging practice, Issei smiled as he prepared to fire again, just for Riaz to walk in front of him with a frown on her face. Go home now, Issei. Riaz said sternly. You're the one who wanted me to train him, Riaz. This is what you asked for. Issei smiled viciously. Riaz was clearly not amused and aimed a power of destruction sphere at his face. Go home, Issei, or the next attack to be fired will be mine, and unlike yours it won't miss. Riaz scowled. This was overkill even for Issei, and despite how she felt, she had to put her foot down. Finally, you start acting like a king, Issei smiled before leaving just as Riaz wanted. A concerned Irina and Zenobia wanted to follow, but a hand from Yumi told them that now was not the time. Something was clearly bothering Issei, and none of the girls knew what. For now they could only hope that Issei calmed down after a breather. Partner, calm down, Drake lectured. It was obvious to the Red Dragon that Issei was furious about something and that he needed to vent, and his partner would do just that. Issei was sitting at the large fountain in the middle of Kuoh's major park. That's not okay, Drake. I shouldn't lose my focus like that. Issei chided himself. Gasper was an innocent pawn in all of this, and he knew it. No, you shouldn't. I'm amazed that Lady Gremory had faith in such a hothead. LeFay Pendragon smiled bitterly as she walked in front of him. Unlike their earlier meeting, LeFay was back in her witch clothing with a smug look on her face. She decided to follow Issei after the meeting, figuring that the curse would be gone since he didn't react, which is why she was in her old outfit. LeFay, I'm not in the mood to deal with you. Get lost. Issei growled, trying to hold back the power of the curse that returned with a vengeance. I know you're not, but you need to calm down, and I'm still annoyed about having to wear that uniform. So if you want to take out your frustration on anybody, follow me. LeFay smiled as she turned her back on Issei, figuring they could spar for a little bit. Unfortunately for her, the current Issei wasn't in an honorable mood and simply chopped her down from behind. As LeFay drifted into unconsciousness, she turned around and she realized she messed up big time. A smiling Issei looked down at the unconscious mage, and many thoughts popped through his mind, some healthy and some certainly not. Now what to do with you? Issei questioned as he reached for the blonde wizard just for him to freeze lightly on instinct. Stop right there, Issei, Valerie growled from behind him, which was uncharacteristic for her, especially towards him. The killing intent coming from her actually shocked Issei a bit. LeFay approached me in her mage uniform, well aware of the consequences. Issei replied calmly. Some might consider it suicidal to be that calm, but Issei was aware how much leeway he had. Valerie stared at Issei and activated her sacred gear behind her. Yes, but now it's your turn to be aware of the consequences. Keep going with whatever you've got planned and I'll kill you. Valerie said coldly. Issei was slightly amused and taken aback at the same time. Don't tempt me, Valerie. You know that we're rivals, and the only reason we haven't fought is due to our mutual respect for Azazel. Issei smiled just for a dragon shot to fly by his head. Yes, and as my fellow dragon, you know that my family means everything to me. Let her go, Issei, and we'll forget this ever happened. Keep going and the next dragon shot won't miss, Valerie said coldly. There was a part of Issei that wanted to test Valerie and see what would happen, but that part of him was very minimal. He was well aware that Valerie could kill him if she truly wanted, unlike Riaz. She was simply stronger due to her devil heritage and the matchup that came with their sacred gears. You win this round, Valerie. Issei smiled as he moved his hand away from LeFay and made his way home. What he didn't see was the look of relief on Valerie's face as he did so. She really didn't want to fight him if she didn't have to. Damn it. Valerie cursed. Had she not interrupted, it's very likely that Issei would have at bare minimum had his way with LeFay and worst case killed her thanks to the curse. The fact that nothing happened earlier meant there was some solution, but clearly the curse was still in effect. Issei didn't go by the orc the next day or the Monday and Tuesday after since it wasn't in the mood to deal with anybody including the kendo club. He was as aware of anybody that he overdid it with Gasper and LeFay, but he was tired of it all. He kept to his duties as lovers with Irina and Zenobia, but the girls knew something was bothering Issei regardless. Arriving in homeroom on Wednesday, he sat at his desk as always and prepared himself for the usual greeting from Murayama and Caddis, who did keep that up. Much to his surprise, it was Yumi who approached Issei first, straddling his waist, just as Murayama and Caddis would. "Issei, please stop by today," Yumi pleaded before pressing her lips to his. The class had long since gotten used to the morning routine, so it didn't faze anybody. "I'll consider it," Issei smiled back, but when Yumi left Issei's lap, Carloman took his place. "I know you're angry, but we still need you," Issei, Carloman said bashfully before following Yumi's example. "Seems you need to go see the devil's drag," chuckled. "Yeah," Issei mentally replied. He had been avoiding the group because he was mad, but he couldn't hold the manipulations of the adults against Ria's and gang, particularly since he wasn't exactly the most on-the-book person himself. As Carloman left, Issei resolved that he would go see the girls today himself, at least for a moment. "Good morning," Issei. Murayama smiled, hopping onto his lap, reminding him that the orc weren't the only ones he neglected before another heated makeout session began. "Okay, so I'll send a clone to the orc." Issei smiled, figuring the clone could handle Gasper, while he resumed his duties as manager of the kendo club. The smiling Issei made his way to the orc, ready to deal with Gasper once again. Sure, it was a clone, but considering Gasper's skill level, it was enough for basic training. Opening the door, he saw a relatively shocked Riaz. "You came?" Riaz said in shock. Issei smiled as he walked over to Riaz and leaned down and planted a kiss on her lips as an apology. "Yes, I did. You didn't deserve me behaving as I did the other day, and I'm sorry," Issei said bashfully. "It's okay," Riaz replied as though she was putty in his hands. "And I don't get a kiss, Issei," Valerie teased as she got up from her couch. "You do too, Valerie," Issei said, reluctantly, aware that he wronged her rather nicely also. He could have avoided dealing with LeFay, but he didn't, and it nearly caused irreparable harm to their relationship. Issei walked over to Valerie before wrapping his arms around her waist. Despite the fact she threatened to kill him a few days ago, Issei and Valerie made out for a minute before Issei pulled away. "Now that you've properly apologized, are you ready, Issei?" Ria said calmly, trying to focus on the task at hand instead of growing jealously. "Yeah, I'll train Gasper today. I'll be waiting downstairs with the others as you bring him to me," Issei smiled. Riaz pouted because she knew Issei was going to use the time to make out more with the others, but she knew it couldn't be helped. "Fine," Riaz pouted as she got up to go grab the vampire. "Thanks, Riaz," Issei smiled before using his speed to get behind Riaz once again and plant a kiss on her cheek. Dirk, Riaz thought to herself. She only wished Issei was more affectionate with her naturally, instead of just using it to calm her down. Riaz arrived outside with Gasper, and much to her surprise, he was waiting patiently with the others. When Gasper saw Issei, he freaked out and activated his powers, freezing everybody but Issei and Valerie, who were immune. "Pathetic, but I understand." Issei smiled as he looked towards Gasper. "No way," Gasper said in shock, not expecting Issei to resist his power. He already knew Valerie could, but he didn't expect Issei to be able to do so. Issei turned towards Gasper and smiled. "You're afraid of your powers, aren't you?" Issei stated. "Oh yeah, watching him the last few days, it's obvious that he's scared of what his powers can do," Valerie said solemnly. "Of course it is. People called me a freak because of these powers, and even my master had to look me away," Gasper said bitterly. He may be shy, but he was no fool. Riaz feared his powers and hid him away, and even now she still did. It hurt far more than he cared to admit. Valerie frowned at the young man's words and decided to help things along. "But you're not a freak, Gasper. People have a really stupid tendency to react badly to things they don't understand. Supernatural beings are actually worse at it than normal people," Valerie said calmly before walking over to him and putting a hand on his head. "My father abused me as a child because my grandfather wouldn't accept that he fell in love with a human. It made me hate my devil side so much that I basically refused to acknowledge my own name and heritage and left the underworld." Kaneko over there watched her sister seemingly go crazy and now refuses to acknowledge a power that would make her a force to be reckoned with. Mikeno watched her mother get murdered by her own family, and now she hates herself too, along with the father who was the cause of everything. Valerie revealed, shocking Gasper and Issei, who didn't know those little details. "No way," Gasper said in shock. "She's right, and I'm not much better. Before I met Riaz, a fallen angel tried to kill me because somebody feared the potential of my power without even being aware of the fact I awakened it. They were so scared of what I could be they tried to kill me." Issei chuckled from his spot. The way the supernatural world embraced and feared power was always hilarious to him. Valerie couldn't help but notice that thanks to their words, Gasper was holding on to his power and realized that his body unconsciously wanted to hear what they had to say. "Listen to me, Gasper. There are 4 types of people with power in this world. Those who fear their power and hide it, those who fear their power but work to control it, those who embrace their power and let it control them, and finally those who embrace their power and learn control it. Right now you're the first one, but with the help of me and Issei, you're going to become the last one. You're actually trying controlling it right now. Valerie smiled. Gasper was shocked that his power was still going and it had been 5 minutes. I'll try. Gasper said bitterly, focusing himself even more. Good, because that's all you can do. Issei said, happily finishing the conversation. Now once I get back into position, unfreeze us since we have training to get to. Valerie chuckled. Yeah, Gasper smiled, and when Valerie returned to her previous spot, he undid his power at last. With the time returning to normal, Riaz continued as though nothing had happened. Sorry to keep you waiting. Riaz said bashfully. It's fine. Now let's get started. Issei said with a smile. Yeah, Gasper said happily, much to Riaz's shock as he walked over to Issei. Riaz POV. As Gasper walked over to Issei, I was absolutely stunned at the change that had occurred. Issei was one thing, his temperament always a question, but Gasper was a whole different matter. Realizing that something happened when Gasper froze time, I went over to Valerie in order to find out what. After all, she was no doubt behind it in part. Valerie, what did you do? I asked in disbelief. Why don't we talk somewhere private? Valerie said with a smile that unnerved me more than I cared to admit. Alright, I replied, and we moved back inside. Irina could watch Issei and ensure he didn't take things too far this time. Once we were back in the club room, I cast some privacy wards on the room. Careful, aren't you? Valerie chuckled. Yes, well, I had the feeling you didn't want others knowing what you were going to say. I replied with a smile. She did say keep it private, and for somebody like Valerie that was a red flag. That's right, Valerie replied with relative calm. I told Gasper that he isn't the only one in the Gremory peerage who fears his power. Valerie said with a smile that bothered me more than I cared to admit. So you told him about Akeno, huh? I sighed, since it was obvious Valerie would know about her circumstances. Yep, and Kaneko as well, or should I call her Shirin? Valerie continued. How do you know that name? I yelled angrily. Valerie simply smiled, because I've been good friends with her sister for quite some time now. Valerie continued, completely stunning me. What? I exclaimed, since her sister Kuroka was a traitor to Evil King. Valerie relaxed calmly. Her sister has been part of what I could consider my peerage for a few years now. By the way, your brother knows the truth about Kuroka as well. Valerie smiled, causing me to frown. So my brother knows the truth about Kuroka but won't tell me. I pouted. Yeah, devil politics is a nasty thing. Valerie chuckled. Yes, but how would you know that? I asked. Not telling. Valerie smiled, causing me to frown even. Dealing with Issei was bad enough, but Valerie, I always had a weird feeling about her. Sure, she saved us from Kakabiel, but even then, it felt like she was hiding something. Perhaps it was time to fight back. You do well not to anger me, Valerie Amano. Remember that this is still my town, and if I deem it necessary, I'll get rid of you in a heartbeat. I said smugly. Valerie looked at me with a look of amusement and disbelief before saying, you won't, and we both know it. I'm a wild card, but you need me, Riaz. With your peerage as it is, you don't have the firepower to protect Kuoh from major threats, and let's face it, Kakabiel would have killed you guys, and right now you'd be at war if not for me. Now if you don't mind, I want to see what Issei does with the kid. Valerie smiled ruthlessly before walking out of the room. She was correct, and that's what made the whole situation worse. Valerie and Issei were by far the strongest supernatural beings in Kuoh if you didn't count Azazel, and I needed them to keep my city safe. That bitter feeling was one that I hated and I wished I could do something about. Normal POV. Riaz and Valerie returned to find Issei and Gasper hard at work, with Zenobia and Irina helping to instruct him. Irina and Zenobia would toss softballs at Gasper, and it was his job to freeze them as quickly as possible. Given the welts on Gasper's head, it was clear those efforts had worked to a point. Welcome back, you two. Issei smiled, causing Riaz to stiffen once again. The Dragon Emperors were a problem, and one she couldn't overcome very easily. The last few days proved that. So what did we miss? Valerie replied calmly, clearly not as nervous as Issei. Right now we're just working on control, but it's gonna be a slow grind. The kid's got a long way to go, but we've got him on the right path, Issei replied calmly. I see, Riaz replied with a bittersweet smile. I'm gonna get stronger, Riaz, I promise. Gasper said with a smile. The cheer coming from the young vampire was good enough for Riaz, and at this point that was all that mattered. That's good, Gasper, Riaz replied, trying to stay positive. As she watched the group train, her mind wondered just what lay ahead. Issei Hyoudou was not in a good mood at all, as he made his way towards Nachizuri Preparatory for a kendo match on the custom bus that Sona gave the club as another measure to keep Issei in the supernatural world's good graces. The large black bus was very much like a limo, so the driver couldn't see the girls in the back, which came in handy, given what was happening on the dark black love seats that each of the girls and Issei sat on. Issei, is everything okay? Murayama said bashfully as she relaxed on his lap. Due to the upcoming match the girls couldn't enjoy a proper fuck, but that didn't stop them from sitting on his lap and enjoy his touch for a little bit. Yeah, I'm fine. It's just been a weird week. Issei replied calmly as he rubbed his hands over Murayama's body. The conference was in a few days, and while Gasper's training was progressing, the kid was still nowhere near competent enough to deal with foes, and it was getting annoying. Yeah, I bet. We have this new transfer student named Gasper in our class who's clearly a guy but wears the girl's uniform. It's weird, but we've gotten used to it, one of the first-year girls named Karina revealed. She had tan skin with mint green hair and big orange eyes. She wasn't very busty, but Issei didn't mind. That's gotta be weird. So does he get changed with the guys or the girls? Caddis wondered. They allow Gasper to wear the uniform he wants, but they do make him change in the proper room. Karina revealed. Makes sense. Caddis shrugged. I doubt Gasper will be wearing a men's uniform anytime soon, which has to drive the teachers crazy. Issei chuckled. You're right, but how did you know that? Karina asked again. Gasper is part of the orc also. Oh, and your time is up, Murayama. Issei explained like it wasn't a big deal. Ironically enough, it was Karina who got to sit with Issei next. What's the deal with the orc? For the longest time it was impossible to get into. Now it seems like every transfer student can get in without any issues. Karina questioned. Issei frowned since they were beginning to pray to Mew, take it from somebody who knows the club. The less you know the better. Issei said firmly before beginning his teasing of the first-year girl. Karina pouted, but her focus turned to Issei's touching. Their manager knew something they didn't, but as long as he kept playing with them, they weren't going to complain. When they got off the bus arrived at Nachizuri Academy, they were met by the familiar face of Genevieve Arcana and a second girl who was a bit taller with dark black hair and hazel eyes. Hello girls of Kuoh. It's a pleasure to see you. Genevieve said calmly. What's going on, Genevieve? Murayama wondered since this was unusual. Our school's policy is that every male who arrives on campus must be screened by a member of our council before he is permitted on campus by himself. I'll be taking him over to the student council office to do that screening, Genevieve explained. But Murayama started to say before Issei put a hand on her shoulder. It's fine, Muri. You girls just get ready and prepare for a good match. This won't take too long, Issei smiled. Fine, Murayama pouted. She really didn't like it, but she had no choice. Issei was their manager and had become a bit of a good luck charm since his arrival. While the kendo club went to the locker room, Issei was escorted through the ornate buildings and made his way to the student council's office. It was a relatively simple office with a large brown desk and a fancy black chair behind it and a few regular brown chairs in front of it. Issei sat on the regular brown chair and Genevieve took her place behind the desk. So is that little dog and pony show over, Genevieve? Issei smirked. What do you mean? I'm following our school's policy. Genevieve replied calmly, but Issei wasn't having any of it. Yes, but if such a policy really existed, Kuoh would have been notified by now, especially since I'm a manager for the girls' kendo club. You made that policy up in order to get me alone, and since this is my first time on campus, nobody would have questioned it. Issei countered. It was actually clever all things considered, and she clearly had a plan. Genevieve frowned before casting a privacy barrier behind him. You're right, Red Dragon Emperor. I wanted to get you alone so I made that up. Genevieve said in a more serious tone. The fact she used Red Dragon Emperor instead of Issei really got on his nerves. Really, you're trying to recruit me again. I thought we went over this. Issei deadpan, showing a bit of killing intent once again. Genevieve froze at the killer intent but kept her cool. Yes, am I, but this time I'm going to try something different, Genevieve replied before walking in front of the desk. Oh, Issei replied with intrigue in his voice. That intrigue only grew when Genevieve began to undo the pure white uniform of Angel Academy. That's right. You said that a few less clothes would make for a better pitch. So here we go. Genevieve replied with her outfit on the floor. Issei couldn't help but appreciate her breasts that were a little smaller than Murayama's and the lack of underwear revealing the shaven pea underneath. I see, and what about the match? Issei smiled, aware that she had a match to compete in with his kendo club, and if she wanted to continue down the path she was on, she would have no chance of doing so. We've got 40 minutes. Genevieve countered, causing Issei to smile like a loon. Alright, Genevieve, so what's your pitch this time? Issei smiled, aware that today just got a whole lot more interesting. The naked Genevieve stood right in front of Issei, hoping to make him their newest spy. Originally that role belonged to the White Dragon Empress Valerie Lucifer, but she withdrew her interest and caused the brigade far more trouble than she knew. Now they turned to Issei, who was still human and thus prime for recruiting if they were smart. My pitch is very simple, Issei. Join the Cows Brigade and all the beautiful women you could ever want, including me, are yours to do with as you please. We have beauties of many different types in the brigade and they could all be yours. Genevieve said calmly. His previous actions showed that he was a pervert and that was their only hope. Issei had to admit that as far as pitches go that was a pretty good one, but it was one a few months too late. Well, he could at least have some fun before he returned to the girls. If that's all you got for me, Genevieve, I'm afraid you don't have much. As it is, I have the whole kendo club from Kuoh, 2 members of Ria's peerage, and 2 other girls who are part of the orc that will drop their panties for me at the snap of a finger. Plus, Ria's has been practically begging me to fuck her properly, and it wouldn't take much convincing to get her queen, should I actually bother. Why in the world would I give all that up? Issei smiled viciously. He didn't even bother to include his rival who would easily give herself up to him, and with a little convincing, he could probably enjoy Le Fay as well. Genevieve's offer was useless. Since she was desperate to stay on his good side, Issei decided to see just how much he could have. Getting up from his chair, Issei took his right hand and shamelessly groped Genevieve's right breast, eliciting a nice moan before trailing it down towards her p-dot. A frozen Genevieve was helpless as he stuck a finger into her snatch, keeping the pressure on. You could still have the man more. Genevieve moaned, but she was struggling under his touch. Is that so? Issei smiled viciously, taking his left hand and sending it towards her left breast, and just as he had with the right teased her left breast, while adding a second finger to the mix. Yes, if the old Mao faction gets their way, we can give you the Grimoire peerage as a prize. You could even have the Citri peerage, and any other devil you want could be yours. Genevieve tried to explain, but her body was quickly giving in to Issei's touch. Nachizuri's purest nature was a good thing to many, but for Genevieve it made her a giant target for the very experienced Issei. You weren't listening, Genevieve. Why would you give me what is practically mine anyway? Issei smirked as he continued to shamelessly molest Genevieve. He was rock hard underneath, and it would be a simple task to take her, but he was going to have his fun first. But Genevieve tried to protest, but Issei's teasing was proving to be too much for her. She was at her limit and it was only a matter of time until she gave in. But nothing, Genevieve. There's absolutely nothing you can give me that I don't have, and since we're alone and you had the bright idea to cast a privacy barrier, there's absolutely nothing stopping me from pulling down my pants and fucking you on this desk. Issei teased while keeping his attack on her snatch going. The suggestion of them continuing was the last straw, and Genevieve's resistance had fallen. Issei. Genevieve screamed as her release finally arrived, spraying her juices all over Issei's fingers and down her toned legs. The fact she was able to shamelessly molest him was humiliating, but the worst part was that she had enjoyed it. I'd say this conversation is over, wouldn't you? Issei smiled. Using his magic, Issei quickly got rid of any trace of love juice on his body before making his way towards the door. The spider orgasmic high Genevieve was focused enough to know that if Issei left this room her chances were over. Wait, Genevieve protested. Having just arrived at the door, Issei turned towards the still naked blonde and with a vicious smile on his face said, unless the next words out of your mouth are, fuck me Issei Hyoudou, I have a match to watch, since my girls are no doubt nervous about facing off against your talented teammates. Genevieve was pretty much screwed at this point. Her recruitment had failed, that much was obvious, and Issei's molestation left her with a burning desire that wouldn't fade anytime soon. Her only chance was to get Issei to do it, and if that meant humiliating herself one more time she would do so. Give me a second, Genevieve spoke out, the defeat in her voice obvious. The smiling Issei turned around and watched with joy as Genevieve spun her body around before and bending over the desk so her ass was in the air and her pee was right there for Issei to enjoy. I believe you were about to say something. Issei smiled, knowing that this was no longer about the Cows Brigade. It wasn't lost on Issei that this was another swordswoman that he managed to conquer, and this one would be just as sweet as the day he conquered Murayama, due to the fact that Genevieve was not only Nachizuri's shining star, but the kendo world in general. With a massive blush on her face, Genevieve said the words Issei wanted to hear, fuck me Issei Hyoudou. Make me yours. If Issei could see her face he would notice the massive blush on her face and the sour expression she was sporting. It was truly a beautiful mix. Very well, Issei smiled as he walked back towards her with hunger in his eyes. This was turning out to be far more fun than he expected. Lemon start. The smiling Issei snapped his fingers, causing his Kuoh uniform to disappear and leaving him naked. Genevieve recognized the use of magic and turned her head just to see his massive member right in front of her. That thing's huge. Genevieve said in disbelief. Yes, it is. I do hope you at least lost your hymen. That way this won't hurt at all, Issei smiled as he prepared to add another swordsman to his ranks. Genevieve's eyes widened since that thing would tear her apart, and the fact she was a virgin was the worst part. Wait a minute. Genevieve protested as she spun towards Issei with an amusing amount of agility. In a matter of seconds, Genevieve had gone from bent over the desk to being hunched in front of it with her face in front of Issei's shaft. She was soaked for sure, but that monster would require a lot more to not cause her severe pain, and she knew it. Past Issei smiled. He couldn't help but laugh even more, since that was proof of Genevieve's submission to him. At least let me get a little more lubrication. Genevieve said bashfully. Works for me. Issei smiled happily as Issei presented his shaft for Genevieve to lick and she did so. This is unreal. Genevieve mumbled in between licks. The Chaos Brigade's desire to recruit Issei had led to her become a tool for him, and she knew it. This is just another day for me, Genevieve, but I'm glad you're enjoying this. Issei chuckled. Dirk. Genevieve pouted before sliding her lips down his shaft. That's very good, Genevieve, keep going. Issei smiled. Seeing the legendary Genevieve Arcana pleasing him like she was some shameless girl was beautiful, and despite bobbing her head up and down for close to 5 minutes, nothing had changed. Issei wasn't going to rush her. Taking a moment to relax her sore jaw, Genevieve pulled away before staring at Issei with a look of annoyance on her face. When are you gonna come, you shameless bastard? Genevieve exclaimed, finally wondering what was taking so long. He was more than ready to pierce her at this point, but the fact he barely said a peep as he blew her was infuriating. Issei looked down on Genevieve and a smile formed on his face yet again. I've been getting multiple blowjobs from the Kuoh Kendo Club ever since I joined, and some of those blowjobs are double and even triple blowjobs. In other words, there's not a thing you can do to make me come unless I will it to happen. Now I think you've got me lubed up more than enough to have my fun with you. Issei revealed, causing Genevieve's eyes to widen. Genevieve was utterly furious, but in truth she wanted him to finish. Sucking his dick was incredible, but now she wanted to feel it inside her. Make this quick, Issei, if we don't get back soon, the match will start. Genevieve reminded Issei as she took the same position from before. This was the way she was going to lose her virginity, but she wouldn't give him the satisfaction of knowing so. You might have a match to get to, but I have no such issue. Issei smiled as he lined himself up with her soaked snatch. How? Genevieve exclaimed. When I used the restroom I made a clone of myself and it snuck back towards the kendo hall. In fact, I'm probably with my girls right now. Issei smiled viciously, causing Genevieve's eyes to widen. Halfway into their trip, Issei asked to use the restroom. Luckily for her, they had just passed one of the few male restrooms in the school. You bastard. Genevieve exclaimed as Issei ruthlessly slammed into her snatch, giving her yet another orgasm. Fortunately for her, she was no longer. Thank you, Genevieve. By now my clone should be making his way to the auditorium and make up some excuse to give that black-haired girl to explain why you weren't back. Issei smiled as he at least allowed her a moment to breathe. He couldn't help but notice the lack of a hymen, but even more so the small trail of blood that indicated he had claimed her virginity. Fuck you. Genevieve cursed, since that meant her plan was ruined. Issei's response came as he leaned down and teasingly kissed her on the cheek. No, Genevieve, I'm going to be the one fucking you. Issei smirked as he grabbed a hold of her hips and began moving inside her with short, precise strokes. He never quite went all the way in making sure to tease the entrance to her womb, but the knowledge that he could at any time was enough for him. Ah. So good. Genevieve moaned happily. She was putty in his hands and she knew it. Right now nothing else mattered besides pleasing this man. You're me squeezing quite nicely, Genevieve. Maybe I should try something new. Issei smiled, pulling out of Genevieve, causing her to pout, but it didn't last long as Issei flipped her so he could see her blushing face and hardened nipples. That's better, Issei smiled before sliding back into her, causing the moans to resume. Yes. That feels so good. Genevieve moaned before wrapping her legs around his waist so he could finally go all the way inside her and pierce the entrance to her womb. Good girl. So before I ruin you for other men, is there anything else you want me to do? Issei smirked as his thrusts pushed Genevieve further down the rabbit hole. My breasts. Play with my breasts more, Genevieve pleaded, her body long since having succumbed to Issei. It was ironic that she had come to recruit him, but now if he asked her to become his spy, she'd do so just to keep feeling this good. Very well, Issei smiled as he leaned down and began licking Genevieve's breasts with his tongue as he hammered her snatch even more. Yes. Genevieve screamed as her body continued to know pure pleasure. As Issei's thrusts pummeled her body, she knew that she was forever ruined, despite the fact he hadn't even given her oral yet. Issei smiled as he looked at the clock in the room and noticed that the actual match was about to start. Well, there's good news and bad news. Issei smiled viciously while continuing his thrusts. What's that? Genevieve replied. The bad news is our club's match is about to start. The good news is that, if I remember correctly, as long as you're listed in the match lineup, you can show up late as long as you arrive before your match starts. Issei smirked. You bastard, Genevieve thought to herself, since she couldn't save face at all. If he was on his way back already, there was no scenario that would cause her to actually save face. He just wanted her to fall further and further into his clutches. Fuck me, Issei. Fuck me for as long as you want, you rotten bastard. The only one who knows where we are is that girl I was with earlier, and she's not actually a part of the kendo club. I couldn't get back in time even if I wanted to, Genevieve said with a mix of anger and lust, with her legs finally falling from the spot they had on his back. Her plan had failed miserably and she knew it. Very well, Issei smiled as he continued to move inside her. 5 more minutes passed and Genevieve had orgasmed twice more and Issei was still going strong. The worst part for Genevieve was that Issei still hadn't come yet. Come already, you freaking bastard. I'm sure you could have long ago, Genevieve said angrily. Her plan to recruit him had failed and she had been moaning his name for 30 minutes now and she had nothing to show for it. Her pride alone demanded that she make him at least come once. Issei smiled, well aware that he ultimately won this little war. Very well, Genevieve. You've earned some release. Issei said before pecking her on the cheek and releasing the mental hold he had on his orgasms. It was a brutal trick and one he had been using ever since he came into the room. With all the stimulation he had received, this orgasm was going to be a beauty. Thank you. Genevieve screamed as Issei's massive release stormed through her body, filling her to the brim in seconds. Fortunately for her, Issei's famous control of his release stopped her stomach from resembling a balloon, which it would have had Issei continued. You're welcome, Issei replied with a smug expression as he pulled out of the swordsman. Lemon end. That was incredible, Genevieve moaned as she lay collapsed on the desk, her stomach bloated from Issei's cum. There was no way she was making the match, and she knew it, and cleaning this whole thing up was going to be a bitch, since that type of magic wasn't her thing. Issei smiled as he walked over to the other side of the desk and towards Genevieve's head, ready for another round or two. Issei smiled, showing a rock-hard member that was ready for more. Genevieve's eyes widened, but she realized that by this point she might as well finish. Fine, but once you're done having with me, you clean this shit up. The type of magic that'll stop this room from resembling a brothel isn't my specialty. Genevieve pouted. Issei smiled, and Genevieve responded by leaning up and wrapping her lips around his member yet again. 1 hour and 2 powerful orgasms later, Issei left Genevieve in the room with an ahegao on her face and a stomach bloated with cum. She was ruined for other men and she knew it, but luckily for her Issei was sterile, so she wouldn't have to worry about any kids, and Issei did have the decency to clean the room up with his magic as he promised. What a victory, girls, Kata said happily as she bounced on Issei's shaft in celebration, enjoying a post-match fuck. Genevieve never came back from the screening, and as suspicious as the Kuoh girls found it, they weren't going to complain, since it became a really easy win for Kuoh. Congrats, girls, Issei smiled while groping Caddis as she bounced on his shaft. The rest of the girls were sitting on their chairs getting themselves ready for their turn with a real Issei, who was smiling like a loon after the fun he had. After leaving a dazed Genevieve, Issei alerted his clone, who used a small break in the action to leave and vanish when nobody was watching. The girls had no idea what Issei had done, and they probably never would if he had his way. Hey Issei, mind if I ask something? Murayama wondered as she groped her breast with her left hand and slid 2 fingers from her right hand in and out of her snatch. Sure, what's up? Issei smiled. I noticed you came back from that screening pretty quickly, but Genevieve showed up. Is everything okay? Murayama wondered. Nothing happened at all. Issei replied, but his member hardened inside of Caddis, remembering his fun with the blonde. Then why did you just get harder? Caddis protested, causing a dark glare to appear on Murayama's face. Sorry, Caddis. Genevieve was hot and I imagined what it would be like if she was the one bouncing on my shaft instead of you. Issei teased. It wasn't exactly the greatest response, but compared to saying what really happened it would do. Caddis pouted, but she kept moving nonetheless. Well, that's good. We have enough competition already and Genevieve would be too much. Murayama replied with a pout of her own. She would worry about what Issei may or may not have done after she gets her round with Issei. It was just simpler that way. There was no more talk of Genevieve after that, and the only sounds in the limo on the way back were female moans and smacking of hips. Just the way Issei liked it. The next day went by pretty quickly, and since the kendo club had the day off, he could go visit the orc and his new protege. As Issei arrived in the clubroom, he was surprised to see Riaz was all alone. Is everything okay, Riaz? Issei wondered with a hint of annoyance. When the girls told him to go on ahead, he found it odd, but now it was clear that Riaz wanted to talk to him about something. Riaz looked at Issei with a dark expression before saying, "Can I trust you, Issei?" Riaz said nervously. Issei was a wild card, but more importantly was the hold he had on the group. Luckily for Riaz, she told the girls about her plan to talk to Issei the day before, so they would take their time getting here. Issei couldn't help but frown at the question and decided to play a little game with Riaz since they were alone. Let me answer your question with another question. When I asked to meet with Ajuka Beelzebub, do you know what I asked him? Issei smirked. No, I don't. Riaz frowned. She was certainly curious, but she couldn't bring herself to ask until now. I asked him how he created the evil pieces so I could make something similar for myself. Issei replied, causing Ria's eyes to widen. You wanted something to connect Zenobia and Arena to you. Ria said in shock. She could tell their energy was similar to Issei's, but she as of yet had no idea why. Now she knew. Correct. I wanted to ensure that when Arena returned she was protected from becoming a devil because it wouldn't have suited her personality. She was vulnerable and we both know that you rely rather heavily on that to get your pieces. Zenobia was a bonus that I didn't plan for, but I wasn't going to say no to her either, Issei said replied coldly. Rias wanted to protest that, but it was true in a backward way. Akeno, Gasper, Yumi and Kaneko were obtained because Rias found them at their weakest point and became their savior. Heck, Rias planned to do the same thing with Issei, but that obviously failed. Then she remembered the display with Kakabiel, and some of her bitterness returned. So tell me, Issei, are you going to take Carloman and Yumi from me also? Rias said angrily. Seeing the way he manipulated Yumi during the battle with Kakabiel bothered her far more than she cared to admit. It was also no secret that Carloman was his thanks to Riser's failure. Not at all. They seem happy being with you and that's okay with me. Issei replied, causing Rias to sigh in relief. As for your original question, the answer is that you can trust me. As long as my family and my lovers are safe, that's all that matters to me. That of course means that if I'm not around, I trust you to take care of Yumi and Carloman. Issei replied with a smile. Rias was frozen by Issei's statement, but it made sense given his personality. Dragons were after all extraordinarily possessive of the things they treasured. As long as I know I can trust you, I'm okay, Rias smiled bitterly. She still had her doubts, but having Issei as an ally was a lot better than having him as an enemy. Good. I assume that means our private talk is over and the others can join us. Issei smiled, aware that the others had arrived. Irina, Zenobia, Carloman, Yumi and Asia walked in from the door, while Akeno simply entered from the kitchen. How much did you girls hear? Rias said nervously. The four girls who appeared from the door looked at each other before Carloman finally spoke. We got here when you asked if Issei would take Yumi or me from you. If you're worried about that, then I've clearly failed as your knight, Carloman said, calmly hiding the hurt she felt from the statement while understanding it in a backwards way. Carloman is right, Rias. I swore my loyalty to you long ago, and that hasn't changed. Yumi smiled before turning towards Issei. What we have is amazing, Issei, but I hope you understand if I was asked to choose between you and Rias. I'd choose Rias every time. Yumi smiled. Issei smiled at the statement. If I ever reached a point that you were forced to do so, I'd hope you girls cut me down. Issei smiled. Damn right we will. You're my childhood friend and I owe you so much, but I'd cut you down in a heartbeat if it was to save the supernatural world. Irina replied confidently. If Issei ever goes that off the wall, the one killing him is me. You girls talk big, but if the time actually came you girls couldn't do it. This guy can manipulate anybody if he had a chance. Valerie smirked, appearing in the middle of the room. Thanks, I guess, Issei retorted. He knew Valerie was hiding with a cloaking spell while he and Rias spoke, and Rias knew the same. Does anybody want tea? Akeno smiled, trying to change the subject. Sure, I'll take some. Issei smiled and ironically Kaneko picked that time to walk into the room, the only one having not showed up until then. What did I miss? Kaneko said nonchalantly. Nothing that matters, Rias smiled, her fears alleviated for the moment. Then let's get to training. Issei smiled happily as though the intense conversation was over. The rest of training went by in a flash, and after a relatively simple dinner, Issei made his way to his bedroom. Right now his thoughts were only on the upcoming meeting and what the plan was for how they protect Gasper. His musing was naturally interrupted by a magic circle that appeared in the room, and to Issei's surprise, it was Carloman who appeared from it. So what brings you to my bedroom, Carloman? Issei chuckled. She was wearing a black short-sleeved top that hugged her body nicely and a pair of black sleeping shorts that barely went past her impressive rear. It was a nice look for her and one he had seen the few times he went over to her house to sleep with her. Something admittedly he hadn't done much recently. Tell me, Issei, are you using me the same way that Lord Riser did back when I was a member of his peerage? Am I just another girl for you to fuck whenever the others aren't available? Carloman said bitterly as she recalled her former master. When she was a member of Riser's peerage, her whole life was about sex and about satisfying Riser. She had no will of her own, and the only thing stopping Riser from fucking her every day was the fact that he needed some girls functional. She thought Issei was different, which is why she gladly offered herself to Rias as an apology in order to spend more time around him. Discovering his connection to the Kendo Club caused her opinion of Issei to sour, but she endured since they could work around that. Unfortunately, Irina and Zenobia's arrival and their quick advancement in his life caused the questions to return. She needed to know where she stood as soon as possible. It seems I have a few people who I need to apologize to. Issei smiled bitterly, catching Carloman off guard. What do you mean by that? Carloman replied. The fact you think I'm using you for sex is a bit bittersweet. You are my friend Carloman, and I'm glad to have gotten to know you, but I need to act like it more. Issei smiled. I see, Carloman replied happily. So how about this? I'll send a clone by your apartment every night so I can get to know the real Carloman and not just the beautiful girl I've been fucking. Issei chuckled. I'd like the. Carloman smiled before sauntering over to Issei. However, we can start that another night. Right now you need to make me feel good since we haven't been having sex either. Sure, Issei chuckled, and his night ended with Carloman screaming his name happily. The time had finally arrived for the three factions meeting, and as Issei, Irina and Zenobia approached there were nervous feelings all around. For Zenobia and Irina they would be face to face with the man who currently held heaven together, and there were many things they couldn't help but wonder. "Are you girls ready?" Issei said, calmly aware of their concerns. "Yeah, but it's tough. I know Lord Michael did what he had to do, but it still hurts," Irina admitted. She was fortunate her father pulled the strings she did, otherwise who knows what would have happened to her. "Yeah, and unfortunately it's going to get worse from here." Issei frowned. Since Gasper wasn't used to people, it was ultimately decided that somebody would have to take the role of watching over him. Valerie agreed to take care of it, but when Riaz asked who would do the deed, Valerie only smiled. If Issei was a betting man, he'd say she had Kuroka doing it and wanted to hide her connection to the rogue devil for a bit longer. "Yep, but we have you to protect us among other things." Irina smiled. It was practically impossible to miss the countless number of soldiers around the meeting hall. Devil, Fallen Angel and Angel troops were all flying above the academy and hoping that their services were not required. It was a truly vexing situation. "Yeah, but let's hope I don't need to." Issei frowned, well aware he would be fighting somebody soon enough. The final player has arrived." Surzicha smiled as he sat in his spot on the circular table in the middle of the room. The Gremory head's long red hair was flowing halfway down his bed and his blue eyes were as fierce as ever. He was wearing a long white robe that flowed down his body and a set of gold and silver armor above it. It was a regal appearance indeed, and Issei felt a modicum of respect for the man. He was pleasantly surprised to see Serafal wearing a green business suit right next to him. Behind the pair was the Gremory peerage along with Sona Citri, all dressed in their Kuoh outfits just like Issei. Azazel was across from Surzich's wearing a red jacket that was open to show his bare chest and grey pants and dress shoes. Behind Azazel was Valerie in her Kuoh uniform as well. The final participant was Michael, a young man with long blonde hair and green eyes. His outfit consisted of a red long robe with a gold cross on the front of a white alb. He also had golden shoulder pads and a white sash to complete his regal appearance. Michael didn't bring anybody with him, but that was fine for everyone involved. There was a seat for him also between Azazel and Surzich's, and Issei promptly took it with Irina and Zenobia standing behind him. It wasn't lost on Issei that he and the girls were right across from Michael, which is humorous. "Well, I'm here now. Let's get this show on the road." Issei smiled. By this point there was nothing he could do but pray the Kuroka was enough to deal with the Chaos Brigade members that were sure to attack. End of the here. So that's it for today's video guys. Before you go, just like the video and share it with your friends. Bye.